They weren't just thieves, they were unwanted kings of a lost republic, a floating democracy forged in blood, gold. In the forgotten margins of history, they lived freely, in a world that wanted them erased. When modern minds picture pirates, they see a Hollywood fantasy, colorful outlaws with parrots on their shoulders, rum in hand, and swords drawn beneath the black flag. But that image, it's a lie, a mask hiding a darker, richer, more human. Between the 1600s and early 1700s, the Caribbean was more than crystal waters and hidden islands. It was a violent crossroads where broken empires collapsed, where faiths clashed, and where global capitalism was born in chains and smoke. In that chaos, thousands of outcasts, sailors, deserters, escaped slaves, and the disillusioned did something extraordinary. They created a society of their own. No kings, no crowns, they elected their leaders, they shared their treasure, they exiled tyrants. Their loyalty, not to nations, but to... They were the Brethren of the Coast, a brotherhood of rebels who founded one of the world's first egalitarian republics, not on land, but on the decks of stolen. While Europe tore itself apart chasing gold and glory, these men and women built a fleeting utopia, fragile, blood-stained, and real. And when the empires came for them, they were hunted, betrayed, and hanged, their names forgotten, their bones buried under sugar, salt, and silence. But for one burning moment, the outcasts ruled the sea. This is not the myth of pirates. This is history, and it is far more dangerous than legend. No one knows the exact moment history shifted. But when the first Spanish ships landed on the shores of the Americas in the late 15th century, carrying the cross, gunpowder, and unquenchable greed, a new order began to take shape. An order written in blood, gold, and betrayals. Spain gripping the treasures of the New World, silver from Potosi, gold from burned cities, sugar from forced labor, and souls bound in chains, rose to become the wealthiest and most feared empire on earth. But that wealth did not bring peace. It sparked a storm of envy and ambition across Europe. England, France, and the Netherlands, rising empires driven by religious fury from the Protestant Reformation and a thirst for maritime dominance, did not declare war the conventional way. They didn't send navies. They unleashed the outlaws, men given royal permission to plunder, loot, and burn in the name of their... These were the privateers, pirates with papers, wolves draped in the cloak of legitimacy. They sailed not under the laws of kings, but with their blessing. They wore no uniform, yet carried a nation's flag. They didn't write the laws, but they enforced a new kind of power on the high seas. We often call them pirates, but they were something more dangerous, pawns in a... They were the first ghosts of a coming storm, the first rumble of war over the Atlantic. From the empire's insatiable hunger for treasure, from the cracks between faith and ambition, a force emerged that no throne could ever truly control. The pirates of the... They weren't mere thieves. They were the living consequence of an ancient fracture between civilization and violence, between God and gold. And when blood spilled into the ocean, history could no longer... Around the year 1625, along the wild, windswept coast of northwestern Hispaniola, a band of Frenchmen lived in silence, tucked between jungle and beast, between survival and... They brought no gold, no muskets, no holy cross, only fire, knives, and smoke. They hunted wild game, butchered the meat, and smoked it slowly over wooden racks called bow. From this simple act of survival came a name that would one day haunt an empire: buccaneer. They were not warriors. They were survivors, men with no nation, no recognition, no banner but the blood in their lungs and the hunger in their bellies. They were cast out by civilization, crushed beneath both poverty and power. But history, like a starving beast, does not ignore its orphans forever. The Spanish, fearing any presence that might challenge their iron grip on the Caribbean, struck swiftly and mercilessly. The hunting camps were burned, men were slaughtered, the survivors scattered. But instead of vanishing into the smoke, they drifted and resurrected on a jagged little island called Tortuga. There, on this unforgiving rock, the meat smokers transformed. They sharpened blades. They learned to sail, to raid, to fight. And above all, they vowed. In 1640, under the hands of a French military engineer, a fortress rose from the stone Fort de Rocher. A jagged tooth of cannon and stone pointed out. From that moment on, Tortuga was no longer a hunter's refuge. It became the first pirate port in Caribbean history, a bastion for the lawless, a sanctum of revenge draped in the colors of freedom. Spain had no idea what it had created, not with... The men who once smoked meat in the jungle were now burning entire coastlines off the map of the Caribbean. From hunted men, they became a force. From jungle smoke and roasted meat, they climbed aboard the decks of ships, eyes fixed on the storm ahead. And there, adrift on the waters of the Caribbean, something occurred that history had never seen before. A brotherhood with no kings, no gods, no borders, but one bound by order, strength, and something rarer still: trust. They called themselves the Brethren of the Coast. No throne chose them. They elected their leaders not by bloodline but by merit, loyalty, and earned respect. Before every raid, a captain was chosen not to reign, but to lead through cannon fire and crashing waves. They did not live by the laws of empire. They wrote their own code, carved not into stone but into flesh, reputation, and survival. These were their articles of conduct. Plunder was to be divided fairly. Betrayal was punished without mercy. The man who lost an eye received more than the man who kept his. And if one died, his share would go to his family, if anyone lived long enough. Tortuga was no longer alone. To the south, another city rose. Port Royal, a place where rum clashed with silver coins, where secrets whispered louder than prayers. Runaway sailors, escaped slaves, deserters from collapsing empires, they all came. From Tortuga to Port Royal, a new world was taking shape. Chaotic, blood-soaked, and strangely free. A world where lawlessness was governed, and every exile had a shot at becoming legend. The Western empires never understood what made pirates dangerous was never just their swords. It was their structure, their order in defiance. They were not mere. They were a democracy born on the edges of the map. And for a moment, the sea answered only to them. It wasn't kings who crowned them. It wasn't popes. It was the sea itself that gave them their names. Henry Morgan, John Coxon, Bartholomew Sharp, Edward Teach Blackbeard. Names that needed no dynasties, only fire, gunpowder, and the terror they etched deep into Spain's memory. They didn't strike at borders, they tore into the beating heart of an empire. Portobello, Maracaibo, Panama. Cities once guarded by stone walls and sacred faith crumbled before their blades and flame. It wasn't war, it was a curse set loose on the tides. The peak of their legend came in 1680 in a campaign known as the Pacific Adventure. It was a voyage beyond anything the maps dared draw. They crossed the Isthmus of Darien, not with armies, but with. They didn't just raid Spanish ports in the Pacific. They ripped open the veil between two oceans and made the world understand. Nowhere was safe from the shadow of the Caribbean pirate. They didn't fight for nations. They didn't kill in. They fought for a freedom with no flag, for a cause born in chaos. And they left scars so deep Latin America still remembers. This was no golden age. This was an age of blood, gunpowder, and their names will never be erased from the map. Every legend has an end. Not always in fire, not in the clash of swords and shields. But when peace is signed on paper, while the blood on the deck has yet to dry. By the late 17th century, a single event would forever rewrite the map of fear across. England and Spain shook hands. The very powers that once fed pirates under banners of national interest now turned their backs with ink and royal seal. Letters of marque vanished, sailing orders became arrest warrants. The flags that once danced in the hurricane now fell, in silence. Worse still, the collapse didn't come from the outside, but from within. The brethren of the coast, the loose brotherhood that had shaken empires, now fractured beneath the weight of its own blades. English turned on French. Well, the French distrusted the Dutch. Loyalty splintered like rotted wood beneath a storm. And then came the strangest twist of all. Many of these men, once hunted across the oceans, chose to lay down their blades and pick up the plow. They bought land, built plantations. And then came the strangest twist of all. Many of these men, once hunted across the oceans, chose to lay down their blades and pick up the plow. They bought land, built plantations. Others went in the opposite direction, joined the navies, hunting the very outlaws they once called brothers. Their glory didn't end in blood, it ended in Tortuga became just a faded name on an old map. Port Royal sank not only beneath the sea, but beneath the weight of compromise. And so, the very men who once tore maps apart were now swallowed by the maps they once defied. The end never comes with a blade. It comes when even the legend learns how to battle. After the final cannon of the War of Spanish Succession, 1701-1714, fell silent, a new breed of men rose from the ashes. No more kings to sanction them, no more wars to justify their violence. Privateers abandoned by the very nations that once fed them now stood at a crossroads. Die in poverty or become what the world feared most. And they chose the path with no return. In Nassau, a small bay on the Bahamas, the wind carried the scent of rebellion. There were no castles, no crowns, only black flags snapping in the storm and laws etched in blood, honor, and trust. This wasn't a colony. This was a nameless republic, where the sea was the only border and freedom was the last sacred thing. Here names became legend. Charles Vane, the man who would never bend. Calico Jack, the romantic rogue with a skull flag smile. And Bonnie and Mary Read, women who fought like living myths. And Blackbeard, the demon who rose from the fog. Nassau wasn't just a gathering place for It was a burning torch in the darkness of empire, a cry for equality from the depths of the lawless sea. From penniless sailors to runaway slaves to freed black men, all found something in Nassau that Europe had never offered them, a chance to be human, to choose for themselves, to live and die on their own terms. They needed no throne to rule, only a ship, a flag, and the unshakable belief that freedom, even fleeting, was worth bleeding for. No legend lives forever. When an empire realizes it has created a monster, it begins sharpening the knife to slay its own bastard child. In 1717, King George I of England did not send thunder. He sent a piece of paper, a royal pardon, a promise of mercy to those willing to kneel, a trap written in ink and blood. 1 year later, the real blade arrived. Woodes Rogers, governor of the Bahamas. His mission, erase Nassau, end the pirate age. He brought a strategy, blockade the harbor, rebuild the forts, and most clever of all, hire pirates to hunt their former Benjamin Hornigold, once a feared pirate, now hunted ghosts, not for gold but for survival. Calico Jack was captured, Charles Vane was hanged. Stede Bonnet, the nobleman turned outlaw, met the rope as well. Blackbeard, the demon with smoke in his beard, was decapitated in 1718. His blood spilled into the ocean like a ritual sacrifice marking the end of an era. Between 1716 and 1726, over 500 pirates were publicly executed. A cold, steel-carved message riding on sea winds. Freedom was dead. The pirates were no longer. Tortuga became just a faded name. Port Royal sank beneath the sea and beneath the weight of compromise. The blood of the free is never wasted. It sinks into the ocean and whispers to history. There was once a time the sea belonged to no